So item changes. Let's continue. Big time contract. They basically gave it 250 health. That is huge. This item just got a huge upgrade. It's now a VIP booster with a perk, and on top of that, when you give it a bloodbound, it's more survivable. You know, when you do a bloodbound builds, I've been messing around with these a lot. If you watch my stream, you'll have seen me mess around with something like a Luna 3-star with a big time contract, right? Being able to give it 250 health is really nice on top of that. It's easy to look at this and be like, well, it's just a VIP booster worth of value. And it is. A VIP booster is good, but it's still even a little bit more than that, because the ability to equip it on the same hero that is already equipping another item is really valuable, right? Like, it's not just an additional VIP booster, it allows you to kind of cheat the single item limit. You know, when I have a really big Luna 3-star with the Bloodbound ability and 250 health, you know, I'm kind of equipping two items at once, if we're calling this a VIP booster worth of value. So this is a huge buff. You pick big time contract on round 2 or 3 over a lot of stuff now. I'm not joking. You don't need to go into Bloodbound. It's not a necessity. It's something that you have the option of doing early, if you find like an early Ogre 2 or an early Warlock or something like that. And it's something that you have the option of kind of like doing late. If you have a comp that has a carrier for big time contract, you can put just like a sacrificial level 1 Mr. Warlock in your front line. Maybe a big time contract will kind of go to town there. This is a big buff. Bloodbound in my mind is now no longer a like meme build. It's probably still niche. I don't think you can go this too often. It's item dependent, right? But it's still something that's in certain niches can be very competitive. Brooch of the Martyr. Oh, I also, I mean, I kind of mentioned this before, but Ogre's buff it kind of like compounds with this, right? Because if you get like a 3-star Ogre, it can kind of like work well with the idea of your big 3-star big contract carrier, and then a Warlock buffing, a level 1 Mr. Warlock buffing both of them. Brooch of the Martyr just got 50% debuff resistance, makes you more resilient towards stuff like stuns and silences, which is kind of nice. It won't work on something board-based like Disruptor's Static Storm, because that's not like a debuff duration. It's just like applied to the squares on the board. But overall, it's a pretty minor change. I guess it's a little bit cuter, but it doesn't really help too much. It's not something that's really going to boost the tier value of this item. Chainmail back up to 10. So at 7, it was effectively a 34% EHP increase. That's effective HP against physical damage. So if you had something like 100 health, this +7 would turn that 100 health into an absorption of 134 physical damage, right? Over, however many attacks. Now that it's +10, the EHP increase from physical damage is 49%. These are both values on a 5 armor unit to start, which is pretty much almost every unit early game is 5 armor. There's a few exceptions, and that's insane. I mean, Chainmail was already regarded as, depending on who you asked, it was either the best or the second best to Gloves of Haste. Some people like Gloves better. Some Lords players liked Gloves better, and some Lords players liked Chainmail better. I personally was in the Gloves camp. No question there, honestly. And both of them got buff tiers, so that's pretty crazy. Tier 1 items are a little bit out of this world right now. So Chainmail, pretty nuts. Gloves is basically better for like late game. 25 at this point % attack speed increase in the late game is huge, whereas Chainmail really helps these like early game spots. Like for the first 10 or 15 rounds, this 49% EHP increase is gigantic. Even Claymore, which is pretty weak before, got a bit of a bump up to 30. I never understood why this was 21. It was a very weird number for it to be, but now it's 30. 30 makes it a bit less bad. Honestly, it still can't even close to compete with Gloves or Chainmail. Really, really not even close. I gotta talk a little bit. If you don't know about like attack damage versus attack speed outclasses attack damage by so much. This number is a DPS increase percentage. If I put this on a Luna that is dealing 300 damage per click, which is very easy for Luna because her glaives are a 300% multiplier on her base damage. If I put this on a Luna that has, not 300 per click, 300 DPS, this will increase the DPS by 25% of 300, which of course is 75. It goes 75 DPS. That's pretty big. It's not like obviously gigantic, but when you compare that to Claymore, it's really not even close, right? So you also gain more mana from this. Obviously, with a passive can't gain mana, but if you put it on something that wants to charge mana, this helps you charge mana, whereas Claymore often doesn't. It pretty much won't. It does a little bit in the early game before you're hitting the mana cap for dealing damage, but Gloves is just so much better. So yeah, Claymore still pretty weak, but I guess you could pick it over some stuff now. Hood of Defiance. Tier change from 3 to 1. Hilariously enough, this item is still not necessarily great. It's a little bit debated how good this item is. I've talked to a few Lords players. I'm still not too sure myself. Some people like it, think it's cheeky. Some people think it's still garbage. It's very funny that it can be changed from a tier 3 all the way down to a tier 1 and still be considered by a lot of people pretty weak. It really goes to show how this item was before at a tier 3. So Hood of Defiance, of course, giving you 10 HP regen and 50% magic resistance, also goes to show how insanely weak Cloak was before. This was a 15% magic resistance with 0 HP regen. And now it gets replaced by Hood of Defiance, and this is still kind of dubious as a prospect. Again, that's crazy. But ultimately, I think this item is fair. There's going to be certain situations you're going to want to pick this if you don't really have anything better. And it does scale into the late game, right? It's something that's kind of weak early, but scales pretty well into late. So Octarine Essence, tier change from 2 to 3. A bit of a nerf to this card. I was actually a little bit surprised to see this. I'm not sure exactly why they bumped it in that way. I think it was very fair as a tier 2, but it's a bit of a nerf to some Warlock abilities, like, for example, Witch Doctor and Necrophos were probably the single best users of Octarine Essence, because Warlocks, Mages, and Shamans all have the ability to double their mana gain from attacks, and that works extremely well because they have so much free mana. You have Octarine Essence being able to just give so much value, right? Because the cooldown is throttled by your mana gain. So I guess this item is like, theoretically, it's like limiting design space. I don't see why it had to be tier 3 instead of tier 2, but I don't really care about this change too much. It's possible they just wanted to maintain a certain number of tier 3 items, and moving Hood down means Octarine, they just wanted to move up. It could have been the case. Tranquil Boots got a bump, 16 to 25, and this feels a lot more fair, I gotta say. There's a lot you can do with this. This item is actually decent. I might actually pick this over Vitality Booster, which is kind of crazy to say. So Tranquil Boots is 25 health regen a second, Vitality Booster is 215 health flat, and Hood of Defiance is 50% magic resistance and 10 HP regen. And all three items are, in my mind, of a relatively similar tier. I still need to think about it a bit more. Obviously, something like Tranquil Boots against Vit Booster, it takes 10 seconds for it to be Vit Booster value, but in early game fights, like if you pick this up in like round 2 or 3, which is when you're going to see it, for the first like 10 or 15 rounds of the game, this will be outclassing Vit Booster value, because these fights last longer than 10 seconds, especially like the carrier of an item like this, and that can be pretty strong. I still would say it's probably not on the level of Vit Booster. It's really close, but this is actually a pickable item now. So even the move speed isn't 100% useless. So it's probably around the same level as Claymore with those items as well. They just feel like they're just in a different tier. From Gloves of Haste and Chainmail, these two items outclass the others so hard it's not even funny. Force Staff now pushes melee attackers away from the equipped heroes when taking damage. I have to say, when I first read this change, I was like, okay, haha, very funny, Valve, this item is still bad. And honestly, I still do think that's largely the case in general. I don't think there's that many tier 2 items that you can pick this over at the end of the day, right? It's like it's still a tier 2 item. You still see something like Arcane Boots or Blink Dagger, you have to take them over Force Staff, I think. But in spectating these tournament games, there's been a lot of situations where Force Staff has actually come in pretty clutch. Like a Slark will jump in back. Again, we're in a 3-star meta, so like big 3-stars are going to be attacking you. Being able to push a melee 3-star away to the opposite side of the board and force it to spend like 4 or 5 seconds running to try to find something to attack. It's good against like 3-star Chaos Knight. It's good against 3-star Slark. It's like a Scythe of Vice at tier 2. I mean, that's a gigantic upgrade. I did not think much of this effect when I read this change, but this could actually be pretty low key now. I'm not gonna lie. I personally could not take this over something like a Blink, but I think this item might be decent now, like solid decent, not just decent. I need to do some experimentation and mess around with it, but it feels fairly comparable to a Scythe of Vice that is just restricted to melee units. You can't use this on a ranged unit. All right, alliance changes. So these are pretty interesting. These are the last of the changes in this patch, and as mentioned in previous notes, a lot of the alliance-specific effects on global alliance items got basically rolled into these. For example, Brownie changed. All Brownie units have their maximum HP increased. Changed to all Brownie units gain 30 to 60 maximum HP for each kill they have. So effectively, what they